Good night. Welcome to another episode of Pursuit. We will be wrapping up our conversation on mental health, I believe.
Yes.
The last week. And we're hitting it with, I think, one of the darkest or the deepest topics.
Both.
Darkest and deepest. Deepest and darkest. We're going to be talking about suicide and anxiety tonight. So, trigger warning, I guess.
Yeah, probably.
I don't know how deep we're going to be getting, but we'll see where the Lord takes us. But yeah, tonight we're going to be talking about suicide and anxiety, and I feel like this is something a lot of people shy away from, especially within the church.
Definitely.
I feel like aside from saying no, you shouldn't commit suicide, it's a sin. That's really the extent of it. People don't really go into, well, why are you thinking of this, or like what has led you to this conclusion?
And to be fair, I think a lot of people don't know how to handle the response to those questions.
Yeah.
Which is why they really don't ask, because they'll get an answer and then, okay, like they won't know really what to do with whatever you tell them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's the main reason, but I do think it is a big one of them.
Okay, well, that was my reason.
Yeah.
I mean.
Oh, because I know a lot of people don't ask because it's like, you shouldn't be talking about this because it shouldn't be a thought in your mind. And a lot of people also think if they bring it up, it'll put the thought into your mind, which is, I can understand where that's coming from, but if someone's already thinking about it, you mentioning it isn't going to be the reason that they do it.
Right, and I feel like that was something, we had like that mental health, and I think like that was one of the things they said, like, if they're already thinking about it, you saying it or not saying it
isn't gonna.
That's really not gonna make a huge difference at that point.
But yeah, so we're talking about suicide and anxiety, and I think, well, let's start off with the lighter of the two, anxiety. Imagine I said suicide. No, anxiety. I think a lot of times the anxiety that we have talked about, like even in previous episodes, is a lot more light in terms of like generalized anxiety, but there is a level of like anxiety that can kind of, sorry, my knee really had to crack, but there is a level of anxiety that it can draw you to those thoughts. I'm trying not to say the word suicide too many times, just because I know it is it's genuinely like a triggering word for a lot of people, or just like the subject matter itself, so I'm trying to be sensitive to that, but it is the topic of discussion, so I apologize in advance if it's too sensitive for you. But yeah, there are many very different levels of anxiety. That's redundant. There are many varying levels of anxiety that can kind of draw people to different conclusions. I think the level of anxiety that we're talking about here is the kind that kind of not just preoccupies like your mind and your being, but just it's the kind of like debilitating anxiety.
I think it goes back to what we were talking about not last week, I guess maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. Kind of what we started the month on, the emotional stuff, and then the overwhelmed feeling.
Yep.
Right? So when we're talking about anxiety tonight, it's really less of you're anxious over like a test score in school or something.
I think, hold on, before you go further, I think those episodes we're talking like a little bit further, like not just occasional anxieties, but in general.
Right.
Just to differentiate.
Right. And I think what we're talking about now is more of a, I don't want to say systematic, so that's not the right word, but a like long-term anxiety. Things like, it's not like a momentary thing.
I think both anxieties are long-term. It's just the level of stress on your body is differing.
I meant long-term as far as time, like.
I am aware of what
like
long-term means.
Compared to like a month.
I am aware.
But then wouldn't one be short?
Not necessarily. This is why we need to talk about things like this more, because my anxiety is a very long-term anxiety. It's not something that just comes and goes and ebbs and flows. It does get worse sometimes, and it is a little better sometimes, but it is always there. It's just not always debilitating and like constantly taking over the state of my mind.
Okay.
And you see, these things are helpful. But yeah, this is why we need to talk about things more, because there is like the momentary anxiety where it's like, oh, I have a really big test, or like I have this stressful event coming up. But there are just like the generalized anxiety disorder kind of things where it's like I am constantly anxious, just I am able to focus on other things while still being anxious. And then there's that one above it where it's like where you can be constantly anxious, but it's in a way that you can't think about anything else but the anxiety. And that's when it gets to be overwhelming, and that's when a lot of people are like feel like they're losing their mind because you're constantly worried about something that you don't even know what you're worried about. And that's where we come to the deep and dark of the S word.
We can't call it the S word because there's another S word.
There are plenty of S words.
So we can't call it the S word.
What if you just title this episode The S word?
This will be our last episode then. I feel like we really should have thought that beforehand, how to refer to this.
Yeah, I really should have. But yeah. I didn't have anything else to add at that point.
So, do we want to shift focus to unaliving yourself?
Dude, I said, okay, so I was talking to a friend over the weekend, and I made a joke about like, and I said the word unaliving, and he's a bit older than me, right? So he's like, how old is he? Like 30, 31. And he was like, you're also 31.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, what is unaliving? And he's like, what is that? And I was like, well, because people don't like when you say like killing yourself or like, you know? And he was like, no. And then he kept ragging on me saying the word. And I was like, that's how it starts? Because you're making fun of me now, but it's going to become part of your regular vocabulary.
I mean, I'm only used to it because when it pops up on TikTok, they can't. They'll say the word, but then like in the caption they won't write the word. And I was like, okay, that's a weird way to beat the algorithm, but do what you gotta do. But yeah, unaliving yourself. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about anxiety.
It might come up.
Okay, so when it comes to unaliving yourself, right, and our faith, right? I think that's something we don't really talk about. We'll talk about maybe the symptoms, and I don't know if symptoms is the right word when in this discussion. I think we talk about the things that open you up to those unaliving yourself thoughts, like depression, anxiety, the extreme emotional state you may find yourself in that may.
I think we can also throw like societal and like outwardly pressures into that.
There we go, right? But we never actually talk about unaliving yourself. I have to like keep remembering not to not say the word now. And I think we started to talk. You started the conversation on this, and I kind of wanted to go back to it. So, why don't we talk? But besides the fear that if we keep talking about it, you'll plant the seed in someone's mind. Do you think there's any other reason we really don't talk about it, or were those like your main?
I think it's the same reason we don't talk about a lot of mental health things within like the church or like within the West Indian community. It's because you're supposed to just ignore it and keep on pushing with your life. You know, cast all your cares to the Lord, for He cares for you, which I do agree with. But there's still that emotional toll that takes on you. So yes, I do agree. Definitely cast your cares onto the Lord, for He cares for you and He knows what is best for you. But that's easier said than done. And I think, why don't we talk about these things? Because it's also just a depressing topic. It's very heavy to talk about, and a lot of people like in passing conversation, hey, how are you? It's like, oh, I'm really depressed actually. Like I'm actually thinking of like, I don't know, just hopping. You know what I mean? That's not something people want to hear. Right. So a lot of times if I'm going through something and people in passing like, hey, how are you? It's like, oh, I'm really good, you know? Like work was great. I just taught some kids. We had a really good activity. and then you go home.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was even thinking of it just on our side to talk about it like, I don't know, in an informative way or whatever we want to call this, if this is informative or not. I can't think of a lot of people in the Bible that killed themselves.
Yeah.
I can only think of one.
I think we're thinking of the same.
Yeah. And I mean, that's 31 years in the church, hearing probably almost every story. There's only one person. And even then, we only talk about what he did maybe Easter weekend.
Yeah, that's about it, I think.
Right?
And that's not even every Easter weekend.
Right. It's not. Right? I think we spoke about it when we were talking about the Easter story. And even then, we didn't focus on
what he did.
We focused on how he got there.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just a very, I mean, I guess it really is the definition of like a taboo topic within the church.
It's a lot of people don't know how to go about it, and because it is such a heavy or like taboo topic, it's like, because although the rates of it happening and being successful are very high, especially in America, especially in this day and age, there's not a lot of people that can say, I know someone that did this and they went through this, this, and this, and that's kind of what led them to it. Because a lot of times the people that are going through things don't let people know. And that's not why all of them are successful with it, but it's why a lot of people are.
Well, I know one of the more alarming facts was that there are probably a lot, like when people look at suicide numbers, they're obviously looking at the completed ones. I don't want to say successful, but the completed ones, right? But one of the doctor, when we were doing the research, he said medical science is able to stop a lot of the attempts, which is great that there are people who may try this, and if you can get, if someone else is around to call 911, they can be saved. But at the same time, that also means there's a high number of people attempting it still, which to me I found to be alarming, because it's not just that the completion number is high, there's the attempts as well.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, just as bad.
I mean, I think it could be worse in some cases, because a lot of times people are going into it thinking like, this is my last resort and I'm just going to end it all or whatever, and then they are unsuccessful, I guess. I really don't like using that word, but if it's an attempt, it's either
incomplete.
It's incomplete.
I don't know if that's a better word now that I say it out loud.
So the people that have not fully completed the task, right?
It's so hard to find the right word.
Yeah.
But no, keep going.
It's like once they are saved, medically, they still are in that place. A lot of times people don't get the closure that they're looking for, not just emotionally, but they were thinking hey, I'm going to end all of my suffering right now. And I will no longer be around, but that's better than living in the way that I was. And I think the key is to have that support system around you that you're, because I feel like after an attempt, right? After an ambulance or whatever comes and saves you, then you have to live with the fact that you tried to do this thing and it didn't work, and now you're still back in the same place where you are. So how do we end this loop from happening, this cycle of I did this, it didn't work, and now I'm back to where I am. I'm just going to end up trying to do it again because I see no way out of this tunnel. There's no light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, I feel like if you go to a hospital for an attempt, I'm pretty sure they're going to do some type of evaluation.
Yeah.
They're not just going to let you back out. So hopefully in that, it opens the door for the person to get help. Right? From a professional, a therapist or whatever the right word I'm looking for is. Mm-hmm. Right? But I think to what you're saying, I don't even know how to even attempt to answer that, because that's one of those things where I really think you may not fully understand it until you're in that position of you attempted and
It didn't work.
it didn't work, and now you're still here and you didn't want to be, right? But there was something else you said that I want to talk about. The idea of ending all of your suffering, right? Because that's the ultimate goal there of that, right? To end your suffering. And I was thinking about that as we were, prepping for this conversation. And one of the things I noticed is that I don't want to say it does end your suffering, but at the same time, I feel like it creates more suffering. Because if there are people around you, people that care for you, you doing this will create suffering for them. I was watching a movie, like a superhero type movie the other day, and this little girl has like powers, and the government, like, it's one of those kind of things, the government's after her for power or whatever. And she accidentally hurts one of her parents with her powers, and then she tells her dad, "Oh, I promise I'll never use my powers to hurt like good people. I'll only hurt bad guys." And he goes into this whole thing about how he had killed like 2 bad guys or whatever, and she was like, "Oh, okay." Like, she thought he was gonna like be like agree with her, and he said, "But like, what if they had families?" Right? Like, what if these guys had a wife and kids they go home to at the end of the day? Did I have to do that? And he kind of went into this whole thing of like, okay, I did that to protect myself and to get out of this situation, yet I may have ruined 10 other people's lives because I took this guy out of their life. And I think the same thing kind of gets applied to what we're talking about here, where people may feel, hey, this is the only way to end the suffering, but at the same time, you're going to create more suffering for the people around you, whether that's your spouse, your kids, your parents, siblings, whatever it is. I feel like you're going to create more suffering. I don't know if that made sense, because you look very confused at what I just said.
No, it makes sense. I'm just trying to figure out how to say what I'm thinking, but better.
As long as I didn't confuse you, I'm okay with that. All right.
Because I've heard that train of thought as well. I just don't necessarily agree with it.
Okay.
Because if someone is at that, they're in that pit, they feel like they're alone. You're not thinking about the people around you. You're not thinking about the fact that, yeah, if I am no longer here, people will be sad. You're thinking about the fact that the suffering that I'm in is so debilitating and so crippling to me that I feel as though I'm not here anyway. So it's more of the fact that, like, yeah, I'm here physically, but other than that, where am I? Because it's not here. It's like I'm suffering so immensely and no one seems to see it. So I'm going to do this to give myself relief, regardless of the fact that other people might miss me, because they weren't here for me when I was here.
Okay.
And that's why I think a lot of the people that do attempt are the people that hide it very well. Because if you see the signs, and if you have a friend that you know is going through these things and you're reaching out to them, they're less likely to do it. And there was even a stat where it was, I think it was Christians or religious people are 4 to 6 times less likely to commit because they have, one, that relationship with their God. But 2, when you're part of a religious group, you have a network around you. That's not to say that people that are religious aren't good at hiding it, because they can be very well. But it's...
Okay, keep going.
But it's to say that, like, when you have more people around you that are genuinely interested and you have that relationship with God, like a personal relationship with God, that you can talk to him and you can tell him about these things and he can talk back to you about it, it kind of relieves a certain level of stress in your brain.
Okay, so then let's continue on that train of thought there, right? Of us as believers, right? What do we do with suicidal thoughts? Or where do these thoughts really originate from? I think that's the more important thing. So I think when we begin to understand that, we can then begin to understand how is it that we deal with it. Because even with the stat that you had there, right? It's not that 4 to 6 Christians or Christians are 4 to 6 times less likely to have suicidal thoughts. It's they're less likely to act on it, which means they're still having the thoughts on par with a non-believer. They're just not acting on it, right? So one of the things I think that we need to kind of just address right away is where do these thoughts ultimately originate from?
I feel like we all know the answer to this question.
Do we?
I feel like we should. Because if God is love, and Satan is essentially the opposite, he's the father of lies. Having these suicidal thoughts are kind of like you're telling yourself lies that like I don't need to be here. Like I'd be better off if I wasn't here. Even though God has a plan for your life and God has your steps, like he has your path. What is it? He has your steps numbered, or I don't remember the verse or the saying, but like God, he guides your footsteps, right? He has a path and a plan figured out for you. So if you're constantly feeling as though you don't belong or that there's nowhere for you to be, I think that's even more reason for you to kind of fight against it because, well, I feel like I'm just repeating myself at this point because know that God has a plan for you.
I didn't want to jump in because I feel like you're on the right track there. Like in my head, when I look at our faith and unaliving yourself, I finally got back to saying that. I've been trying so hard. I've been dropping the S word the whole time. I see it as an incompatible thing with our faith, right? Meaning
the thoughts.
Yes, the thoughts, and yeah, we'll start there at the thoughts, right? Because, and what I mean by that is, one, when you look at the Bible, we see that God does not say that we're not going to suffer, right? What he does promise is that he'll actually be there with us through the suffering, right? I also believe, right, or rather the Bible says, right, that God has a plan and a purpose for each of us, right? Despite the suffering, there is still a plan and purpose for us. So when we have those thoughts, right, we're in a lot of ways, or I don't want to say just having the thoughts, but if we start to entertain those thoughts, maybe that's the better way to say it, right? We're now going in a lot of ways against God's will, because now we're saying, well, he has a plan and purpose for me, but I'm going to stop it here, right? I'm going to cut things off here because the suffering is too great for me, right? That's always kind of been my view on it, and I know that might be a little harsh, but just kind of removing emotions from what's happening there. That's how I've always kind of viewed it, where you're kind of putting yourself in the place of God in your own life. Yeah. And saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to take full control. And what other way can we as a person take full control of our destiny than to end it, right? Which, again, I think is just incompatible with our faith. Because if we're going to say God has a plan for you, if God has a purpose for you, then we have to trust in him, trust in his timing, right? And I think this goes beyond the support systems that we talked about earlier and things like that. You have to trust that God has a plan. So, yes, the suffering may be more than you can bear, right? And I don't want to get into that quote where, 'cause I don't even think it's in the Bible, right? God doesn't let you suffer more than you can I forget how the actual quote goes, but I think one of the things we have to remember, or if you're someone that you're struggling with those thoughts, is no, God has a plan and purpose for you, right? So you ending your life now, you'll never reach what that plan is, right? And like, I mean, like I've had the thoughts before, right? And it was one of the things where like, I really had to sit and think like, why am I thinking about this, right? And it was one of the things where like, it wasn't something I went to someone and spoke to them about. It was something where I was in a place where like I prayed about it and actually like just kind of spent some time reading the Bible. And I was just like, wait, no, God has a plan for me, right? And I have faith in him. So I'm going to surrender these thoughts to him, right? And let him deal with it, right? Because beyond that, I really didn't know how else to deal with it. So I was just like, and luckily I never made any attempt or anything like that. But I think for a lot of people, it's, as you said, being grounded in your faith, you have to believe that God has more for you than just ending it now.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's important not only to be grounded in your faith, but to have people within your faith that you are comfortable telling these things to. Because it can get lonely, and if you don't have the strength in your relationship that you think you do have, that's a lot. What you said is a lot easier to say than to do. So I feel like if you have that relationship and you have people that can intercede for you as well, it'll definitely help you do further down the line.
And I'm sure I had that because I know there's people within the church that will just gonna be like, hey man, just like, I'm praying for you, and they're like, it's not like a thing in past. It's like the people who are actually praying, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, okay, cool.
One less thing for me to do.
Yes. Have you ever thought about that? This is a total side note. Like, if someone else is praying for me, do I still need to pray?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, if someone else says, hold on, let me think of an analogy to compare that to. I don't know. Like, if someone else is taking an extra breath for you, do you still need to breathe? Like, I don't know how else you can compare. Like, this one's for you. Like, no, you still have to breathe.
I thought you were going the other way with it. Like, if someone buys you food, you don't need to buy food. Because that was like my head.
Yeah, but
like,
you still...
Like, I still have to eat the food, yeah. But if someone else is going to buy me food, I don't need to go buy food. So if someone else prays for me, I don't need to pray.
But you do, is what I'm saying.
I know.
So therefore, that analogy would not work with what I'm trying to say.
I thought you were... Never mind. I thought you said you had thought what I thought.
No.
Oh, so I just have bad hearing then. I really thought you were agreeing like, yeah, I thought that before.
No. I thought you were like, have you thought about when people say that?
Oh, no. All right.
I haven't thought that when people say they're praying for me, I don't also need to pray for myself.
Well, then. I think I shared a little too much there.
It's never too much. Never too much. Let the people know who you are.
I don't do that now. I feel like I should clarify. I don't.
Do you?
I don't do that now. I do pray, right?
Yeah, but if they say they're praying for you this week, do you take a week off?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I used to have that mentality. Like, if you're praying for me and we're both praying to the same God.
Yeah, but you're probably praying for different things.
No, not if I tell them what I need prayers for. In a lot of ways, the logic holds until you really examine it.
So the logic holds until you think about it. Basically. If you don't think about it, it works.
Yeah. You guys agree with me, right? You weren't even listening.
They're both avoiding eye contact. No, I'm pretty sure they were.
All right, back on track.
Yeah.
But okay, so going back to
where does this come from?
Yeah, right. So I think it's important that we all acknowledge the fact that these things come from Satan, right? Ultimately, right? And I'm not, and the reason I'm saying ultimately is I don't want to. I feel like in the church when we associate or blame something on Satan, we then go to, you just have to pray it out of you,
Yep.
right? As compared to, no, there could be a chemical imbalance in your head and things like that, and that causes a depression that can escalate into unaliving yourself thoughts and attempts and things like that. And I'm not minimizing that. I'm saying ultimately, I think these things come from Satan, right? So if we're going to say all of it, then let's say all of it, because we see from the introduction to Satan in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, is him trying to take life away, right? Because in him trying to get Eve and then Adam, well, getting Eve and therefore by getting Eve he gets Adam to eat the fruit, right? We all knew what the consequence of eating the fruit was, right? It was death. So from the very introduction of him in the Bible, he's bringing death, right? And then that gets, you see that reaffirmed in the book of Job, where he launches this all-out assault on Job's life,
Yep.
right? And kills anyone and everyone, and not just people, but things,
yeah.
right? And then just jumping forward to Jesus, right? And I want to say it's John 10:10, right? He says, the thief, meaning Satan, comes to steal, kill, and destroy, right? And then Jesus, I believe it's also in John, also describes him as the father of lies, right? So when we say these thoughts ultimately come from Satan, we're saying Satan's nature is essentially death, right? Whereas, as you started earlier saying, God is love, right? God's nature is to actually give life.
And life more abundantly. Like, not just, oh, you're going to live, but you're going to live well in me.
Exactly. And I think that's something important for us to understand when either we're dealing with thoughts of unaliving ourselves, or we may see someone that is struggling with this, or on the verge of it, or whatever
like they're going down the path.
Yeah, right. It's understand ultimately this is Satan, right? There are other things that can be done besides prayer. I don't want to minimize either side of this, but I think it's important. I always think it's important to ultimately understand who the enemy is, right? And I think when you were describing the thought process, I guess, of someone thinking those things, right? Or even when I had dealt with it, right? It was, as you were kind of saying, it was an isolating thing, and it was also no one cares, no one things, which is, they're all lies, right? Like, what feeds the unaliving thoughts are lies, right? So what feeds these thoughts is Satan.
Yeah.
It's him feeding the thoughts. And what I think breaks people is that they're in a place of, I know I'm going to butcher saying this word, susceptibility. Did I say it right?
I think so.
Okay.
Susceptibility.
Yeah. They're in a place of,
they're just susceptible.
Yeah, there we go.
They
right?
are susceptible.
I think to those lies, yeah.
Yeah, I think once you start to believe them, you just don't see how you were not believing them before. And then you kind of fall deeper and deeper into it, and I think that's how people kind of spiral and they start going down that path. But I don't want to say it's easier to catch yourself at the beginning, but it kind of is. But a lot of people miss those warning signs, and they just think it's like a point of insecurity. But I think if you are grounded in the faith, then it is easier for you to see those warning signs and those red flags blaring. And they're not just like the red flags guiding your path, but it's like, those are, no, red flag, turn away, danger, danger, do not enter.
I also think if you don't follow my sidetracked example of being someone who doesn't pray, and rather spend the time praying, I think one of the things that God can do in your life is, hey, I'm praying for someone, or maybe God's putting someone on my heart to pray for, right? And there might be a reason for that, right? And maybe in that time of prayer, God then brings it to a point of, oh no, I now need you to take it beyond just a private prayer, and maybe now approach that person and say, hey, and it doesn't have to be, hey, God told me there's something wrong, like you're going, no, just, hey, you just been on my heart a lot, and God, I've just been praying for you, right? I don't know what about, but just know, hey, I'm praying for you. If you want to talk, right? And I think when you have that relationship with God, God can sometimes open the door for you to be the person that reaches out there. Because as you're saying, a lot of times it feels as though no one is reaching out, right? Or they don't. And honestly, I don't think it's that they're not reaching out. I think a lot of times is people don't know the specific way to reach someone in that
I don't think there
mindset.
is a specific way.
And so to clarify, what I mean by that is, I don't know if you've ever been like, I don't know if it's like angry with like a friend, right? Or you're looking for a sign, but you're looking for like a very specific sign that's only specific to you. I don't know if that makes sense, right? Because when I was going, all right, like people, it's not that people weren't talking to me and reaching out to me. It's like I was looking for a very specific way for someone to reach out to me.
Okay.
That I just made up in my, like, I don't know if I want to say made up in my own head, but that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So it was easy
like,
for me to say no one cares because they're not reaching out the way I want them to reach out.
I think I know what you're talking about, because like you never know if someone's genuinely asking like, how are you doing, versus like, hey, how you doing? But it's like, even if they're asking, like they're asking, but it is hard to tell when they're walking that line of like, oh, this is just a formality, versus like, I'm a friend of yours that's genuinely asking how you are. Because I think when I was going through, like a lot of times when I was in my darkest times, I did have friends that asked me, but I saw it more as a formality than a genuine interest. And that's when it can kind of feel like no one's reaching out. Right. And I think that's what you were going for.
Yeah. Because I mean, I was even thinking of what you had shared in, I think, our first episode on this, where you were talking about with your sister, right? People probably had asked you how you're doing, and you were still struggling with all the stuff happening, but it wasn't until it was, and you had kind of, it was a very specific moment, a very specific thing happened, and then you were able to open up, right? And I think for a lot of people, that's what they're looking for. Sometimes they don't know they're looking for that, but I think God knows they're looking for that. And I think when you spend time in prayer and you spend time really building a relationship with God, you'll see that He will often tell you, hey, reach out to this person.
There have been so many times where I have, like, God has put someone on my heart and I'm praying for them, but it's like, you need to reach out. And I was like, I guess shy, or like I didn't want to pry. Same. And I didn't want to, like, put myself somewhere that I didn't think I belonged. Come to find out, like, they were actually, like, they were going through it. And it's like, if I had listened and if I had just trusted God as I say that I do, I could have, I don't see myself as like a particularly influential person, but like I could have helped them a little bit, I could have made it a little less difficult for them. Luckily, nothing crazy ever happened. It was just like, a boy problem or something, for a lot of them. But there were some times where I was like, damn, if I had just listened, if I had just done what God was telling me to do, I would be in a completely different place. And so with that other person, just because of like that relationship that you kind of build, in that you are the person that I can trust to tell this to, that's not God, that I can physically, like, and it's I don't know if because I feel like I don't want to say that's a good way to build relationships, because then, like, whenever, I feel like you shouldn't base friendships based off of depression, but
I'll second that.
But it is, good to find people that can share in your struggles.
To be honest, I'll take it a step further and say, when that's happening, like if God's, I don't even think it's about friendship necessarily. I think it's about God seeing, God has positioned you in a place, right? Whether there's a deep friendship or
Like
superficial, whatever it is, He has positioned you in the place where you can be the one to talk to them and reach them in that particular moment or season of their life, right? And I think it becomes less about, because I think like friendship isn't the right word. I think it's relational,
relationship.
right? It's just a relationship, right? And I don't know if friendship is the right word for it or what, but I think sometimes God puts us in relationships with people that He can then use us to be the one to reach out. Because I totally agree with what you're saying. There's so many times that God has like put people on my heart to pray for, and I'm praying. He's like, okay, like you got to reach out now, and I'm like, you sure about that? Like,
but I'm shy.
It's not even shy. It's like, how do I approach someone and be like, hey Ariel, look, I know we haven't spoken in a while, but God told me to talk to you.
Yeah.
Right?
It's nerve-wracking.
No, in my head, because like, if someone was to come do that to me, just out of the blue, I'd be like, nah, you're crazy.
Right?
Right? So
but then you got to think on the flip side. If God is telling you to reach out to someone, it could also be a person that's looking for a sign.
There's that
like
too.
Looking for someone to talk to.
Yeah. There's definitely that too. So I feel like we got really, really sidetracked there.
No, I think it goes all along.
Okay.
Because once you have people in your life that are like not just noticing, but they're there for you, and like you feel like you can tell them things, it's easier to keep you on the right path of like healthy thoughts and a healthy mind and relationship.
So, and now with healthy mind, I think to wrap up, I think we should mention some of the things that we can do to maybe altogether avoid these thoughts, right? And maybe deal with anxiety and kind of all the stuff we've been talking about the last month. I think even let me not get myself in too much trouble here, but even some of the stuff that you guys talked about for your girl talk, right? I think one of the things is we should be careful what we put in our minds. So there's a scripture in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, and it says, "And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise." Right? I think Paul is very clear that we have to be careful what we put into our mind, right? And yes, there are sometimes thoughts will come in, and we have to then. The Bible also talks about putting them under Christ's authority and letting Him deal with it. But I also think we have to do our part to make sure we're not filling our minds with things that may take us deeper into some of those dark places rather than pulling us out. Right? And it's a like the girl talk episode. I know you had mentioned that like when you're driving to work, you're listening to like gospel music and stuff like that, right? At the same time, right? And I'll use it as the example again because you kind of said that you have like you deal with the anxiety on a long-term basis, right? You could also listen to things that may end up feeding the anxiety instead of the gospel music, which hopefully doesn't feed it but starves it, right? So we have to be very mindful of what is it that we're listening to or watching or reading. What is it that we're consuming in our mind that may bring us closer to these thoughts or pull us away from these thoughts?
Dude, when you say that, so in high school and like college or whatever, I used to listen to like battle rap and trap and stuff like that. And some of the guys are so aggressive in the way that they like perform their music. And I found that I was becoming really aggressive as a result of listening to these things. So like I did a test. I was like, all right, let me cut this out for a week and a half, 2 weeks or whatever. And I was just more like calm and mellow. I mean, I still had like my same personality, like I was still like, you know, sarcastic or whatever, but I just wasn't as like aggressive. And it's really wild to think about how certain things that you don't think of really play a part in your mentality and the way that you act and behave and see yourself. So like if you're constantly feeding the thought, like we talked about in the girl talk episode, that like I need to look a certain way, I need to act a certain way, I need to attract this type of guy, then you're gonna constantly be searching for that next thing that you need to do. Whereas also, like we mentioned in that episode, you're fearfully and wonderfully made in his image. Like God has formed your body to be the way that it is because he thinks you're beautiful the way that you are.
All right. So with all of that said, I think it's a good place to stop. I want to say. I think it's important that we do mention, if you are watching this and you are struggling with thoughts of suicide, right? That there is at least in the U.S., there is a national suicide prevention. Yeah, I have the number here. It's 800-273-8255. It should be on your screen as well. If you are dealing with these thoughts, please, reach out to someone who can help. But and as we said, I still think one of the greatest weapons against this is prayer, and talking to God and letting God be that source in your life.
And you don't have to wait until it has passed to come to him about it. He can kind of walk you through it to get to that point.
Yeah. I think even for suicide, God is there with you, and He wants to see you through it. Right? He wants to give life and life more abundantly. So, I would just encourage you to reach out, call that 800 number, reach out to God, reach out to a friend, reach out to your family. Whoever it is, just reach out. Don't isolate in that time. And with that said, I think that ends our discussions on mental health.
Yeah.
All right.
I think that's a good way to end it.